Our first story has multiple parts with a crazy fallout at the end. Entitled Neighbor, Part 1, posted by Ellen Gass. My parents, until recently, lived in the same house for 50 plus years. We had 3 neighbors on the north side over that time. The first was a little old woman we'll call Eleanor. She was a hermit, and as such, us young kids were always scared of her. She died when I was a freshman in high school. It took a few years, and then we had a new guy buy the property named Richard. One day, we found him cutting down bushes on our property. The houses had about 10 feet between them. Our property line was 6 feet from our house, and he had 4 feet. The bushes were 1 foot into our property. Eleanor never had an issue with them. She was a nature lover. She never mowed her backyard. She only mowed the front. It was a push mower, non-power, at 6 a.m. My dad and I confronted him and let him know that those were our bushes that he was cutting down, and we were not happy about it. He didn't care. He needed to do it so that he could get his cars into his backyard. We said, "You have a curb cut out on the other side of your house. You can mow it and have a straight access to the backyard as the original builder intended." He stormed off, and the next day, the bushes were all gone. We watched him drive his cars on our property to his backyard. Oh yeah, these were the cheap Porsches of the mid-1980s, base model 944s. Then Dad and I decided that we needed metal fence posts to mark the property line. We put them 5 inches on our side of the property line and drove them down really deep. There was very little room for him to get anything past them, especially his cars. When Richard got home, we could hear the yelling and cussing for quite a few hours. And then we heard a car start up in the back, and he successfully got one of his cars out, but not with serious damage to the side, nice sized scrapes all along the side of the car. Our newly planted fence leaned in toward our property. I really wish at that time that we had stuff we have today. I'd really like to have a video of that. In any event, we contacted police about the damage of our property, our newly constructed fence, and they gave him a ticket. He tried to claim that we damaged his car and that the officer pointed out that he had no right to use our property unless we gave permission, and it's obvious that we had not. He got the other car out not too long after. Same deal, scraped sides to all heck. This was just the beginning of the issues that we had with him. Now this is going to include the fence. Ultimately, we pulled out the metal fencing and put in treated wood fence posts. We sunk them 4 feet into the dirt and then used a wood lattice panel between them. All of this was up to city code at the time. We also extended the fence well into the front yard. Again, Richard was ticked. He began stacking concrete, rocks, and wood up against the fence, which is still 5 inches inside of our property line. Over time, it made the fence sag more into our yard, and he continued to pile it higher and higher until one day the fence broke. All of his crap fell into our yard. Dad wasn't home at the time, so I took it upon myself to relocate everything back into his yard. So one by one, it all ended up near his front porch. As I was getting close to being done, he steps out of his house as a nice-sized rock happens to hurtle right by him. Well, this ticked Richard off. Cops were called, and they arrived after I had finished relocating everything. When the cop came to interview me, I just pointed to the fence that was damaged. The weight of the crap that he kept putting up against the fence that was well within our property line caused it to fail, I said. I was just relocating the mess that spilled into our yard back into his. By this time, the cops had been out a few times and knew what was going on. They pointedly asked if he had caused the broken fence, and I said yes. I mean, it was the truth. I explained what had happened. They dismissed my throwing a rock at him and wrote a citation for destruction of property. He was fuming when the cops left, and as he usually would do, he left for a couple of hours. Dad got home and I told him the story, and we had a good laugh. Now this was a fun one too. Richard acquired some signs that said "No parking by the order of the police" and put them out front of his house. At that time, I was driving an old 4-cylinder Datsun pickup, green for those who need that, and I was parking out front of our house. The neighborhood, over the years, has moved from single family to students renting places. We live in a college town and we're an easy walking distance to the school. We had a lot of students parking on our street, so sometimes my truck was parked out in front of our house or in front of his. With my sister now driving as well, it was just easier to park on the street instead of playing Tetris with cars. Anyway, a few days after the signs popped up, I noticed he was still parking his cars, with the scrape marks still on the side of the mall, out front. Okay, fair game. I parked out there as well. He called the cops, and the ticket lady came out and issued me a ticket. When I asked her why, she pointed at the signs. I asked if they were official and if he had the permit for them, and she checked, and no, in fact, he did not. Then the cops showed up. He was questioned why he needed the signs and how he acquired them. He pointed to his house. Let me get sidetracked for a moment. He had been working on renovating his house for 2 years at this point. The house was small, like efficiency apartment small. 1 or 2 main rooms, a bathroom, and so on. I had been in the house on a few occasions when Eleanor was living there. He had this, I don't know what to really call it, like a beam. It was meant to lift his roof while he did the internal work on the house. It extended 10 feet out front and back. This beam was constructed of repurposed wood, small pieces and large pieces, scraps of all kinds. It looked like a puzzle, and while it may have carried a load, it was not structurally sound. It was a local joke about what he was doing and how. Now it reminded me of the forts that we would build at a friend's house, where any piece of scrap wood was fair game and it could be made to work. Back to the story. He got 2 tickets from the cops and 3 from the city. One, I overheard, was for no permit. Now this one happened after most of the other stuff and near the end of his time there. I worked as a student operator in a computer lab. I had the late shift a number of nights of the week. It was good money for babysitting computers. Since it was a college campus, we had to park a fair distance away. One night, I looked up and happened to see Richard in the lab. I should also mention that by this time, we had a full family no contact order on him. I didn't think he was a student, but we got a lot of non-students in the lab since we had publicly accessible computers. No logins needed to use them. He was typing like it was going out of style. Then he got up and he left. We did have cameras at the entrances, so I saw him leave. I went over to his machine and I pulled the file from the trash that he'd been working on. I printed a copy out and I read it. It was about all the trouble that the neighbors were making. Hey, that's us, and how he can't get anything done because we keep turning him in. Then the letter went legal. He was trying to write like it was a letter from a lawyer or something. I laughed it off. He didn't show up again that I recall when I was there. One night a few weeks after that, I signed out of my shift and I went home. It was after 1 a.m. I noticed him sitting in the parking lot in one of his cars smoking. Okay, I thought to myself, this is interesting. I hopped in my Datsun pickup and started it up, and it was loud. My muffler had finally let go. I took off out of that lot, trying to not over-rev to make it loud at 1 a.m. for anyone but me. I noticed that he took off at the same time and went the same direction. Okay, this is the way home, but I decided to test to see if he was following me, and yup. I took the most out of the way home, using main streets instead of the side streets, which would have been like 10 times quicker, only to have him keep on following. I went around the block close to the house to make sure that I wasn't dreaming this, and no, he followed me right to the house. I parked in the driveway this time, and he parked where he could in front of his house. I woke Dad up, and then we called the cops. I told the cops that I was taking a long way home due to the muffler and not wanting to tick anyone off, but that I also did a loop around the block, and sure enough, he was following me. They arrested him for a no-contact violation, and when I told them about the previous encounter the weeks before at work, they added a second charge. When it went to court, I wasn't the only one there to testify. They lumped another case of his in with it: destruction of public property. After all that had happened, he no longer had a driver's license. He got ticked because he had to take public transportation. He got even more ticked when the driver wouldn't stop between 2 stops to let him out. He kicked the windows out of the bus. He went to jail for about 3 months. After that, he lost the house and his cars. We would see him from time to time walking all over town, banned from the bus, banned from his house, and his cars. Overreacting, posted by Patient Leopard 2704. We moved into our house about 16 months ago. 3 months after we moved in, we had our first baby. Our neighbor's property is very close to our son's nursery, and they have a pool. We quickly learned in the summer that they had frequent parties with grandkids, lots of screaming and so on, which we could live with. All was fine until about 2 months later, they bought an enormous RV that sits directly next to our property line. When they have it extended, it's literally in our front yard. So much so that we can't cut the grass unless they put the extension in, and even then it's still a challenge. When they bought it, they immediately came over to apologize and stated it wouldn't be extended unless their grandchildren were over. He also said that he would take care of the grass. Neither turned out to be true. It was always extended, and he frequently would wait weeks to take care of the lawn. We had a brand new baby, so it really wasn't a priority of ours. Fast forward to this year. All was fine until RV shows up last month. Same song and dance as last year. Have to ask him to move the extension to cut our lawn. Frequent and late pool parties with kids screaming. Now that our son is 1, noise is more of a concern, especially at 9 and 10 o'clock at night. Additionally, he was doing work on his shed and left a bunch of debris in our yard that we cleaned up. Guests always park in front of our house, and when we take walks, they obstruct their driveway so that we have to go on the street. Last night, they had another party, and when we got home, there were a total of 12 cars on the street. They were all in front of our house, and we couldn't even back into our driveway. The RV extended into our yard. It was excessive. The cars were only in front of our house, not the opposite neighbor. While they have told us before, we are good neighbors, and we try to be quiet for your baby, it just seems inconsiderate, especially having to ask your neighbor to move their crap so you can mow your own lawn. Sued the HOA president. We're taking him to court and bankrupting the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss this satisfying fallout, and I will see you there.